to the Take Two podcast, a ministry of the Christian Campus House at Trine University. This podcast is for you to get a second take on sermons from our weekly worship service. We hope that you encounter the Lord through your time of listening. Here it is.
There was a woman who was traveling, and she was staying in Atlanta. She booked a room at a hotel. The hotel she checked into happened to be the Marriott Hotel. Later that evening, there was a tragic phone call. She got a call saying that her sister was in a bad accident and sadly had passed away. She was upset and she shared her sadness with a hotel employee. The employee, whose name was Charles, took a sympathy card to the staff of the hotel and he had them all sign it. And he gave it to her with a nice piece of hot apple pie. The woman later wrote a letter of thanks to the president of the hotel chain. She wrote, "Mr. Marriott, I'll never meet you, and I don't need to meet you because I met Charles. I know what you stand for, and I want to assure you that as long as I live, I will stay at your hotels." Christian hospitality is more than a passing kindness. It's an incarnation of God's love. The last couple weeks, it's been a while since we've had an actual message, but a couple weeks ago, we have now been focusing on the back half of our Vision series, talking about pouring out. Travis talked about character, kind of the fruits of the Spirit, this character of a pouring out life, an overflowing life. Ike then talked about acts of service through generosity. And this week now we are talking about hospitality. And hospitality has been a long expected act for followers of the Lord going all the way back to Genesis. And hospitality was an important and more regular practice in the ancient Near East, way more so than it is today. But it was seen as a critical piece to the gospel message and to how followers of Christ exuded hospitality. So let's look at one of the oldest stories of hospitality, going back to Genesis chapter 18 and the story of Abraham. Verses 1 through 8, which read, "The Lord appeared to Abraham near the great trees of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby. When he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. He said, 'If I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, do not pass your servant by. Let a little water be brought, and then you may all wash your feet and rest under this tree. Let me get you something to eat, so you can be refreshed and then go on your way, now that you have come to your servant.' 'Very well,' they answered, 'do as you say.' So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah. 'Quick,' he said, 'get 3 seahs of the finest flour and knead it and bake some bread.' Then he ran to the herd and selected a choice, tender calf and gave it to his servant, who hurried to prepare it. He then brought some curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared and set these before them. While they ate, they stood near them under a tree." To give you some context, the previous chapter, Abraham took on the covenant of circumcision. And if you don't know what that is, you can ask one of the staff members about it. But I can tell you that he's probably not feeling great at this moment. Don't know how much time has passed, but these stories happen chronologically, at least in Genesis. And he is very old at this point, around 100 or older. And yet, it says that he hurries to meet the visitors. So he literally runs to them. He's sitting in the heat of the day, and he bows low to the ground, and he's kind of going to Sarah and telling, "Hey, Sarah, get these things around." And then he's going to the servants and saying, "Hey, get these things around." And so he's not just sitting there, and it's just like, "All right, everybody do everything." But he's actually going and serving these visitors, these guests here. showing his hospitality. He offers protection. He offers shade. The heat of the day, very hot, especially in the Middle East. Necessary amenities, foot washing. He offers to wash their feet. And a very generous provision of food and drink. So let's talk about that. He offers 3 seahs of the finest flour. Well, 3 seahs, that would be equivalent to about 36 pounds of bread. And that would be enough to make 60 loaves of bread. That's more than enough rations for 1 month for a single adult. And so he's having all of this bread being made of the finest flour, which would have been made from wheat rather than barley, so therefore is of a higher quality. And then a choice tender calf. Well, the offer of fresh meat was not always a normal component of daily diet, and it was way more than what they needed, again, along with the bread. And so this is demonstrating kind of this choice, higher quality, this banquet that he is throwing for these 3 visitors from the Lord. And this demonstrates Abraham's extreme generosity and hospitality to these visitors. And this banquet that he throws for them is one of royalty. Christian hospitality is more than a passing kindness. It's an incarnation of God's love. So kind of using this story, well, what is exactly hospitality and what does it mean to be hospitable? Well, hospitality is a reflection of God's nature. It demonstrates that same welcoming and compassionate grace of God that we have received. The Greek word for hospitality is philoxenia. I had this prepared. Philoxenia, which literally means love of strangers. And so when you demonstrate hospitality, you're literally loving the stranger. There was a commandment to love the alien, the orphan, and the widow in Leviticus. And in the prophets, God judges the Israelites at different periods of time based on their treatment of outsiders and says, you're not treating them very well. But you need to remember that you were once slaves in Egypt. And so he condemns them for their lack of hospitality to the outsider, to the stranger in the community among them. Hospitality demonstrates generosity and selflessness, going out of your way to make others feel welcomed, valued, loved, even when it's inconvenient for you. It's inclusive. It goes beyond just fellow believers and friends, but it reaches down to the poor, the vulnerable, and the marginalized among you. Jesus and his disciples depended entirely on the hospitality of others when they were going from town to town and ministering for food, for money, for housing. Traveling in the ancient Near East was often dangerous. There were robbers or thieves along the way from different towns, and there were very few inns, so they were very expensive. So early Christians could not afford to stay at inns. They often depended on the hospitality of people in the cities, which often included opening their home for a church gathering. Hospitality was a highly regarded virtue throughout all of Scripture and was a key component to the gospel. So let's take a look at an example of radical hospitality from Jesus in Luke chapter 10, taking a look at the story of the Good Samaritan. Here is the account in Luke chapter 10, verses 25 through 37. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus told him, go and do likewise. So this question that Jesus asked this expert in the law, what is written in the law and how do you read it? What he's asking him is for his interpretation of the scriptures. What he considers to be the greatest commandments. There were 613 written commandments in the books of Moses. And so what do you do when 2 commandments kind of butt up against each other? Where you have this tension of what's the greatest thing I should do? Should I obey the speed limit? But I have my friend who's kind of been stabbed maybe recently and I'm driving to the hospital. Do I obey the speed limit or do I break the law in the speed limit and get him to the hospital? There are 2 commandments there, and what is the greater of the 2? Well, the expert in the law says, well, love is the greater of the 2. The heart of the law is love. And Jesus says, you answered correctly, which is how Jesus interpreted the scriptures as well. And he quotes from Deuteronomy chapter 6 and Leviticus chapter 19 in his response. So we have 3 characters in the story. So let's kind of walk through some of that to kind of understand what Jesus is doing actually in this parable and what the teaching point is. So we have the priest and the Levite. Well, the priest and the Levite would have been members of the Sadducee party, which means that they also served in the temple. And so they had duties for the temple. And they could contract ritual impurity for touching a dead body. And half dead means the man appeared to be dead on the side of the road. And as priests and as Levites, they were commanded in Leviticus chapter 21 not to contract ritual impurity, not to touch or bury a dead body, not even their own father and mother. And so they are obeying a commandment by not going to this person who appears to be half dead. However, they are leaving and going to Jericho. They are coming from Jerusalem to Jericho, meaning that their priestly duties have been completed at the temple. And Jericho was a wealthy community, and many wealthy priests lived there. However, they're also commanded by Scripture to love their neighbor, to love their fellow Israelites, along with the alien, the orphan, and the widow. And they could help save this man's life, but yet they abandoned mercy and compassion. And therefore, their interpretation of the law is incorrect. They have one of strictly following the law, but they're fulfilling the wrong commandment by doing so. See, if you break one commandment to fulfill another, as long as you are fulfilling the right command, that is, you don't break the other one. And so if I speed to the hospital so that Landon gets the attention that he needs, I don't necessarily, in God's eyes, I don't necessarily break the speed limit. I'm not like sinning in that way, but I'm yet fulfilling the right command, which is to save one's life. And so they abandon mercy and compassion. But the Samaritan, so here's this other character, the Samaritan. The Samaritans and Jews, there was enmity between them for centuries. They absolutely hated each other. Why? Well, the Samaritans were originally Jews, but they stayed behind in northern Israel when northern Israel was conquered by Assyria, and a lot of the Jews were hauled away to captivity into Assyria, but they stayed behind, and what they did was they intermarried with the Assyrians. And so they were kind of this mix between Gentile and Jew, which intermarrying with Gentiles who have not converted to Judaism is forbidden in Scripture. And so they were breaking the laws there, and it also made them guilty of idolatry because they took on the worship of idols from Assyria. They later tried to halt the reconstruction of the temple in Jerusalem under Ezra and Nehemiah. And what they do is they build their own temple in order to rival Jerusalem's. And they have counterfeit priests and unlawful sacrifices conducted in this temple. And to the Jews, they were seen as worse than pagans because they sold out their own lineage and religion. And yet, this is the person who shows the man mercy. This is the person who gives up 2 days' wages to care for him, to pour on oil and wine, to have the innkeeper care for him, and to reimburse him later. Rabbis of Jesus' time debated on who their neighbor was and who they should love. One rabbi who had a stricter interpretation said that only your fellow Jews are your neighbors, but your Romans, they are your enemies, for they are your oppressors. Another rabbi who had a more loving interpretation said that both Jews and Romans are your neighbors because they live among you, and you should love them, but not Samaritans. Nobody should love a Samaritan. And yet Jesus goes above and beyond the current interpretation of the day and the approach of who we are to love and show hospitality to. And so, his message is, the person that you hate or who you don't think is your neighbor, the person that hates you, who disagrees with you, that is the exact person you're supposed to love and show hospitality to. That is the gospel. The heart of the law was not just caring for those whom you love or agree with, but also for those who hate you or who you hate and disagree with. Another rabbinical viewpoint that Jesus challenged was eating with tax collectors, prostitutes, and sinners. By sharing a meal with someone in ancient times, you demonstrated that you were in right relationship with them. The worldview of the Pharisees was that of the reason that the kingdom of Israel has not been restored is because there's too much sin and there's a lack of obedience and holiness. And that is why they were under Roman oppression. That was their worldview. And therefore they were very hard on sinners and saw them as the reason for their oppression. So rabbis did not eat with sinners. And tax collectors, well, they were Jews who sold out their own Jewish identity to go work for Rome. And they collected money from their own people. They were often very corrupt because they would add extra fees on top of the taxes for themselves to make themselves wealthy. So they were literally robbing their own people and working for their oppressors. So tax collectors and prostitutes, well, those were the two lowest people on the moral ladder of Jesus' time. However, Jesus goes beyond, again, the current interpretation of the day and demonstrates this radical love and hospitality by eating with them. Now, that doesn't mean that Jesus condoned their lifestyle, but he reached out in love and invited them into something different. Come be a part of this lifestyle. Let me show you the gospel. Come experience it. In Luke 14, Jesus says that when you host a meal, don't invite your friends or people who can pay you back, but invite those who cannot return the favor. Now, I think it's important that we talk about the difference between hospitality and entertainment because they are not the same. Entertainment is exclusive, so it's people that are already in your social circle. It expects a payback. I host, and then you host, and then somebody else hosts, and we kind of rotate. It's often scheduled. Let's put it on the calendar. Let's have this big meal. It requires a lot of preparation. It's kind of fluffed up as this big event. There's a performance aspect to it. You show off your house, your money, maybe food, things that you have. There's a social hierarchy. I'm going to invite people like me or people maybe above me that I'm trying to kind of win favor with. and there is a clear distinction between a host and a guest. Whereas hospitality is the exact opposite of all of those. It's inclusive, people outside of your social circle, maybe people you don't always socialize with. It's an act of generosity. You give without expecting anything in return. It's a way of life. It's often spontaneous. It's an act of service rather than performance. And it enacts justice for the poor and needy among you in your community. And the lines are often blurred between host and guest, where Jesus literally invites himself over to people's houses. Hey, how about you host Zacchaeus? How about you host me for dinner? Although he is the Son of God. And because of the grace we have received from God, we should do good to others freely and not expect a reward. Christian hospitality is more than a passing kindness. It's an incarnation of God's love. So what are we to do with all of that? With all of this? Well, hospitality was a lifestyle and a core piece of the gospel, and so it should be for us. Scholars say that hospitality was a key piece as to why Christianity toppled paganism and emperor worship, where Christianity went from 120 people, kind of this fringe movement, to in 3 centuries became the dominating religion of Rome. And so there should be no excuses for us. Well, I live in a dorm, I can't have people over. I can't do things for people. I live in a dorm room. Well, I have messy roommates, nobody wants to see that, clothes all over the floor. Toilet hasn't been cleaned in a while, Or I don't know how to cook, that's why I have a meal plan. I go to the caf. I'm just a poor college student. How could I ever treat anybody, or a poor campus minister for that matter? But Jesus did a lot of his ministry around tables, around meal settings. Because it was easy. You guys eat 2 to 3 times a day. So the same should be for us, right? We can do a lot of ministry around tables, even in the cafeteria. But it doesn't always have to be a meal. Remember, hospitality is about love for the stranger. It's about loving and caring for the stranger among you. And hospitality should cost you something. Don't just be hospitable to those whom you love or can return the favor. Remember, Jesus' hospitality went down the social ladder, not up. So notice the outsider in your community. Maybe it's somebody who sits by themselves at lunch. Maybe it's that annoying person that you don't like talking to. Maybe it's somebody who talks a lot, maybe even about themselves. Maybe it's that person who's kind of a little weird. You don't like hanging around. Maybe it's your roommate who never leaves the room. Do you ever check in on them? Maybe it's the person in your classes that thinks and believes the exact opposite of you. Have you even tried to get to know them? Maybe it's that professor that just really grinds your gears. Maybe bring them coffee one day. But notice the poor and the needy among you. And you might think, well, poor and needy at Trine, who could this be? Well, let me tell you a couple stories. There was a guy named Austin. A couple years ago, was coming to freshman guys group, but he recently got kicked out of his house. Was kind of living with his aunt. And he didn't really have any money for clothes. He was working on getting a job and kind of Shrine was literally what all of his money was going towards, was to be here. And so he didn't really have much money to get kind of a jacket and some other things. So the freshman guys came together and they bought him a coat and some other kind of clothes for the winter months. Another story of a guy named Aiden, a couple years ago, was going to graduate. He also, Trine was kind of taking every penny that he had, but he was also working a job on the side trying to make ends meet. Got his final bill from Trine, and he was like, I can't pay that. Like, I'm not going to be able to graduate. Here I am, a couple months from graduation, and I can't pay this bill. And so what happened was rep group, some of the staff and others came together to help him and paid it for him. There are other people, those that are poor in spirit and lonely among you. Maybe somebody had a family member pass away. Somebody who just doesn't have any hope anymore. Maybe they're suffering in their classes, going through a breakup. Maybe they don't have any friends. The opportunities are all around you, but are you noticing them? And see, it kind of takes a little intentionality to know your classmates, your teammates, your professors, and your coworkers, to know what's going on in their lives so that you can show hospitality to them. What we need to do is make them feel seen, valued, and like they belong. Spending time with them, eating with them, bringing them into your social circle. And if you really have somebody like on your mind that you want to take out to coffee and show hospitality to, and you don't have any money, come see the staff about that. We can help you out. But what hospitality again does is it demonstrates the same welcoming and compassionate grace of God that we have received. Remember that you were once an outsider, both lost from God, but also I'm sure we can all relate to being an outsider at some point in our life. Remember what it feels like to be left aside. And remember those people who showed hospitality to you and brought you in. And so we should do the same for others. And it's about serving and caring for those who cannot return the favor or pay you back. It's a little harder. That's still kind of easy. But it's also about serving and caring for those whom you hate or disagree with, or who hate you or disagree with you. Now that's a little difficult. That's hard. That's a little convicting. But by demonstrating hospitality to others, we serve Christ and we promote the spread of God's compassion and truth. So I want to ask you, who are the strangers in your community? Around you in your classes, on your team? Who do you need to demonstrate hospitality to? Do we neglect hospitality simply because it's inconvenient? Do we neglect hospitality because it's that weird person, it's that annoying person, it's that person who just won't stop talking about themselves? Do we neglect hospitality because it's the person that we hate or whom we disagree with? Do people experience Jesus by the way we show hospitality? And if Christian hospitality in the ancient world was able to defeat paganism in Rome, what do you think our hospitality could do on this